Next, we're going to talk about voltage-controlled oscillator number 1, VCO1. It has two outputs, a sawtooth output and a square wave output. The square wave output is normaled to the mixer in the filter section. So when you just play this oscillator and you have it up in the mixer, it's going to sound like this. Just a pretty straightforward standard square wave. Some tuning variation there, which is awesome because it's analog. Okay, we also have a sawtooth output, which we will listen to. Let's get that going. I'm going to patch the output of the sawtooth into our mixer, into the channel we were already using. Now, keep in mind that you can have both of these oscillator outputs going out at the same time if you want to. We could, like, for example, plug this into the input of the ring modulator, and we could hear both of them simultaneously. Anyway, so we have those two outputs, which is awesome. And I think, I don't know why I think this, but I think a lot of times people forget that, like, since you have multiple waveform outputs from these oscillators, you have a lot of opportunities. One oscillator output could be going to, the audio output, and then the other one could be used for some other purpose to control something else or to audio range modulate another oscillator. So having multiple outputs is awesome. Okay, let's go down the functionality. Let's start off at the top, the initial oscillator frequency, which just means this is your starting point for frequency. And so we have a whole range, and it's really fun to be able to sweep an oscillator through its entire range with immediacy, because so many synthesizers are not at all set up for that sort of thing. It's one of the great things about older synthesizers is you have the ability to do this. So let's like listen. Oh, let's turn down the ring mod that we've got going because I unplugged the oscillator output. Okay. All the way down into the clicks, and then we can go all the way up. Right out of the range of hearing, or the range of my hearing. You're probably like, no, Mark, I can still hear it. That's where I lose it right there, whatever frequency that is. Anyway, Mark, if you can't hear these frequencies, what are you doing demonstrating synthesizers? Oh, that's a good question. Here, let's tune it back up. So that is the frequency range of this oscillator. You go all the way basically through the whole range of audio, which is fantastic and I suppose to be expected. Next, we have the fine tune, which it just, also this is important because the ARP 2600M has smaller fader throw, which is to say, like, these faders are shorter than the faders on the full-size ARP 2600, it becomes, it's still kind of a challenge to really dial in a frequency if you're trying to tune. So the fine-tune slider is really helpful in that respect. So, and it has a decent range of tuning. It's not just like within a half step or something. It is actually the whole. It sounds like what is that, a minor third? Whole step. A little bit more than a whole step. Seems to have a little bit more down below. It could just be the setting of the fader. Anyway, it's not just within a half step. It's not super fine. It'll give you a range to work with. Okay, let's go down to the audio switch. What this is for, it says keyboard on, keyboard off. But what it really means is that it's doing two things. It's dropping you into a low frequency mode. I wish I had memorized the frequency range of this mode, but basically it's so you can turn VCO1 into an LFO. And it does two things when you switch the switch. It drops you down into a lower set of frequencies, sub-audio frequencies, and it switches off the keyboard. So now it is no longer responding to the keyboard input. So the keyboard is not causing your LFO to speed up and slow down. So, okay, you hear those clicks? That's the height of the waveform. So yeah, we're in a low frequency mode. And if I play a different note, it'll still sound the same. So it's really helpful. It's really cool. The only thing that would be cooler is if they would have designed it so that could be voltage controlled. But come on, Mark. It was 1969 when this concept was formulated. Okay. So you have that. That's basically your LFO switch. Just switch that on and off when you want the VCO1 to become an LFO. Second, we have sample and hold. Now, of course, we haven't talked about sample and hold yet, but when we do, we'll cover how that is happening and why it's happening. And you have a certain degree of variation possible because you can control the amount of the sample and hold in the sample and hold and also right here. So if we set this to a lower note, you're going to a lower setting, you're going to get less variation in the frequencies. The frequencies will be tighter and closer together. And then the higher you slide the slider, the more distant they will be. It's the 1960s computer sound. Okay, so just something to think about. If you turn this up just a little bit, it's a way to introduce variation into the frequency of your oscillator, which allows you to get sort of bigger, richer sounds when used in combination with other things because you have pitch variation. It basically makes it into an unstable oscillator, which is really cool. So it's not all just 1960s computer sounds. Okay, the next one is the ADSR, and a lot of you use modular all the time, and so this is less impressive to you. But as a person who tends to use keyboard-based non-modular synthesizers, it's really nice to be able to have an ADSR control of the frequency of an oscillator, because this is how, you need that to do drums. But so many analog synthesizers don't immediately give you that capability. Now, keep in mind, right now we have our ADSR just set to sustain, which is the default setting I put it on when I'm demonstrating other things. But with it on that setting, keep this in mind. Your ADSR slider becomes a tuning thing. Because it's getting a constant voltage from the sustain. So basically you can use this as a tune, like you can just do pitch variations with this with immediacy. Now, more interesting than that is setting the ADSR to something, more ADSR-y, and then you'll of course hear that. And of course, as you push it higher, the ADSR has a greater frequency range of effect on the oscillator. So that is awesome. Then we have VCO2 as an input. So whatever VCO2 is putting out will come in as a modulation to the frequency of this oscillator. In this particular case, we're getting this kind of almost pulse width modulation sound, which is so awesome. Like we didn't even do anything, and all of a sudden we just made this oscillator into something cool. But of course, if you want to mess with like frequency, and as you'll undoubtedly recognize, setting the different settings on VCO2 will result in complex modulations. In fact, let's have some fun and drop VCO2 down into LFO mode. So this demonstrates the validity of these oscillators as low frequency oscillators because you have the ability to modulate the frequency in so many ways. You can get complex modulations that you wouldn't get in so many synthesizers because the output of the LFO is typically a single waveform. So in this case, you're getting something amazing. Interesting. It sounds like that sample and hold is actually lagged in some way. That's fun. Anyway, so we got into a little bit of, using oscillators together, which is going to happen in all of the demonstrations. But anyway, that is oscillator 1 on the Korg ARP 2600M.